I'm Bridget Basil, and I'm a member of the Parent Education Committee. And our topic today is digital kids, and our guest speaker is Dr. Ryan Smith.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
I appreciate you being here. I know it's early, but it's a good time to have some conversations regarding your kids and regarding the stuff that they're doing digitally. I'm guessing all elementary parents? Yes, do I have anybody here whose kids are older than elementary or who have older than elementary kids? Ah, very good. How old? High school?
2 middle schoolers.
2 middle schoolers. Thinking about you.
Middle school and high school.
Middle school and high school. Thinking about you too. Godspeed. Any other age groups? Okay, how about little tiny ones? Oh, hang on. College? All right. We have a whole separate training for you afterwards. Just you and me. We're going to sit and talk. How about little kids? We got preschool age kids? Parents of preschool age? Okay, good. I asked those questions because we're going to touch on a little bit of everything this morning. We're going to focus primarily on elementary age parenting, but we are going to talk a little bit about everybody. I know this is kind of hard to see, so I'll just talk to you. And I'm going to back up so I don't get out of our screen range. I want to talk a little bit about who I am and how I ended up standing in front of you. I am, as introduced, Dr. Ryan Smith. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I'm the current president of the Texas Association of Marriage and Family Counselors. I was in private practice for a number of years, but I worked in public school systems for 13 years in Mesquite ISD. My job in Mesquite was a little unique. I ran a clinic that did family-based counseling for elementary alternative placement kids. So if elementary kids would get sent to alternative schools, I would work with their parents. So all of my professional experience has been in family-based counseling and in family-based interventions for problems that our kids face. I say that because everything we're going to talk about is going to be a bit holistic in the sense that we can't make change in one member of the family without making some change throughout the family. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Clinically, my research for the last, it's been 7 or 8 years now, has been solely focused on the impact of technology on our relational functioning. I wrote a dissertation on the impact of Facebook on marriage. You are welcome to read it. The spoiler alert is, it's not good. Facebook was not helping marriages, which I know is shocking for some to hear. But I say all that because I've been in this area for a long time. I've been in that digital technology and how it impacts our relationship space for a really long time. And what you're going to get this morning is an overview, to a degree, kind of an assault, but an overview, really, of that information that I think will be valuable to you. The biggest thing I want you to know is, you'll notice in that picture, I've got 2 little ones myself. I've got a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old. They have devices. They have iPads. So if you're worried that the technology guy is going to come talk to you and the end result is going to be, I'm going to tell you to go home and rid yourself of your technology and just make clothing out of wheat. That's not what we're going to do. My kids have iPads. My kids have access to devices. They play Xbox. The goal here is not complete abstinence. The goal is to never engage with technology. The goal is to do it in a healthier way and in a way that makes you, your kids, your family, your husband, your wife, whoever. It makes your family function a bit more effectively. With that said, I want you to know something. My goal today is not judgment. I say that because we're all parents. When we hear presentations where information is given about things we're not doing or things that we could be doing, there's a tendency for us as parents to take that information really personally. We can be convicted by it, but it can also make us feel like we're floundering, make us feel like we're not doing well as parents. That is not the goal today. Something I want to make real clear. This topic is one that you're supposed to struggle with. Congratulations, you are the first generation of parents. In fact, you're the only generation of parents who are having to raise kids in a social media world that you didn't grow up in. Does that make sense? Yeah. You weren't tweeting in middle school because that wasn't a thing. If you said the word Google, you were corrected when you were a kid because that's a nonsensical word. Now these words apply and they apply to your kids in a way that they never applied to you. I say that because, again, we could talk about the difference between digital natives and digital immigrants, but the reality is your kids are being raised with stuff that you weren't raised with. So you're supposed to struggle with this to some degree. We are all in this together. Parenting is really, really hard. We all make mistakes, and I want you to know again, today, this is one of my favorite cards because it sums up most of my parenting with my kids. I want to tell them, you're making it really hard for me to be the amazing parent that in my head I perceive myself to be. All right, so today the goal is not perfect parenting. The goal is not guilt. Today the goal is hopefully a bit of education and a little bit of new stuff. Before we get into it, there is a website that will support this presentation. If you are watching this online, you're not missing any handouts. The reason for that is because paper handouts at a digital parenting thing, the irony was too thick. I couldn't give you digital or paper handouts of that. So I'm going to send you to a website instead. If you'll go to yourbestfamily.com, that is my website, and click on Digital Kids, you'll get all the information that we're going to talk about today. And for the record, in case you're hesitant, there's nothing on that website that's for sale. It's all free. It just supports these presentations. So I'm not trying to get information from you, nor am I trying to get any additional resources. So if you'll go to that website, you can find all the information we're going to talk about today. In particular, there's a tool we're going to talk about at the end that will allow you to hopefully manage technology in your home a bit more effectively. That can be found on the website as well. Again, yourbestfamily.com, and then click on Digital Kids. The theme for today, though, that I want you to hear is that the problem we are encountering in 2018 in America is not the technology. Of course, it's not the technology. The problem is it's us. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about specific apps. Not a ton. We're going to talk a little bit about specific apps, but I want you to know something. If you see Snapchat on your kid's phone or on your kid's device, it doesn't mean the kid is doing something horribly wrong and they should immediately be locked in a dungeon. These apps are not the problem. The technology is not the problem. It's us. It's our inability to manage it. And as parents, it's our inability to really even understand what we're wrestling with. Does that make sense? All right, so I want you to know that the other reason I want to mention this about it, the fact that it's not the technology, it's us. As parents, I think oftentimes we get intimidated by this technology that we don't understand. I don't know how to do all the parent things, and I don't know how to turn off this or turn. So I just kind of pretend it's not there, or I pretend that it's not a huge problem, or as long as I'm monitoring my kid's time, everything else is cool. That's something we can wrap our brains around. I can watch a clock. I can see he's been on his device for 30 minutes, and I can get him off of it, but I don't get what's happening on the screen. And I think as parents, sometimes we see that, we're intimidated by it, and so it prevents us from engaging. We also don't want to look dumb in front of our kids, right? I don't want to ask my kid, my 6-year-old, hey, what's this app do? Because I feel less capable as a dad. I want to encourage you as parents to not be afraid to ask that question. I'm going to give you a more straightforward way to ask that question in a bit. But I say all that because I want you to know you don't have to know the tech. Okay, you don't have to understand the iOS. You can be just as freaked out by that screen time thing that's been popping up on the new iOS on the iPhone as your kids are. It's okay. Don't be intimidated by the technology, because the problem we're going to address today, the problem we're going to unpack today, is not the technology. It's the human beings who are manipulating the technology. All right, I'm going to go somewhere, content-wise. I'm going to go somewhere. Before I get there, stay with me. Okay, and the reason I say that is because I'm going to say 2 words that you may think to yourself, okay, this is the part where I'm going to check out. This part I'm going to go to my phone. We're going to talk a little bit of adolescent neurobiology. All right, I say that because if you don't understand biologically what's happening inside your kid's brain, it's going to make it much more difficult for you to address it. I just got like 2 slides. So stay with me for just 2 slides on some adolescent and some childhood neurobiology. The first one is simple. I want you to take a look at what you see in front of you. This is the limbic system. It does all the stuff that you see here, and we're born with it. The amygdala, breathing, blinking, fight or flight, strong emotions. The amygdala, we kind of come prepackaged, ready to roll. The amygdala is not done, but it's fairly well in place from the time that we are born. This is the part that develops in stages. the prefrontal cortex or the cerebral cortex. I want you to take a look at these parts of the brain, these things that the prefrontal cortex is responsible for. It's responsible for your higher level cognitive functioning. So the upper level stuff, the advanced things that your brain does, comes from the prefrontal cortex. Decision making, future planning, the ability to conceptualize the future as being real, and then the ability to put steps in place to get there, that all happens in the prefrontal cortex. Inhibiting inappropriate behavior. That part of your brain that says, I probably shouldn't do this, comes from the prefrontal cortex, which is why 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds throw tantrums and will scream and yell and lay down in a grocery store, because that part of their brain that inhibits that type of inappropriate behavior is developing. Social understanding, self-awareness, imagination, these are advanced ideas. These are advanced concepts, and they all happen in the prefrontal cortex. The last two, I want to really make sure you understand. Empathy and morality. Empathy and morality. So your ability as a human being to feel empathy, your ability as a human being to conceptualize morality and ethics, those things that guide our decision making, hopefully, those things that define us as human beings, those are all developing inside the brain of a child and an adolescent. Now here's why I say that. The prefrontal cortex is going to go through two primary growth stages. Now it develops gradually over time, but two really big growth stages. Once in the early years of life, so in that early preschool age life, and then second in adolescence. It undergoes a massive overhaul during adolescence. All right, take a look at these things. I expect every kid to some degree and on some level to struggle with every one of these things. I expect young kids to struggle with them. I expect teenagers to struggle with them. And I say that because I want you to understand this is a battle that your kid is going to fight whether they have access to the internet or not. Okay, they're going to be developing their empathy. They're going to be developing their morality. My question to you, as we're thinking about technology, and this morning is all about technology, my question for you is, if you know that these are all things your child is going to struggle with, how does technology play into them? For example, decision making and future planning. People have been asking questions for 10 years why high school kids will continue to post dangerous, incriminating, inappropriate content on social media despite how many thousands of times we've told them, future employers, future colleges, future whatever. We tell them that message all the time, and yet they continue to do it. They're struggling with these. They're struggling with the development in their prefrontal cortex to understand that those things that they're being told are actually real. Empathy and morality. The fact that high school kids, middle school kids will post things online that make us think we're raising a generation of sociopaths. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that as we get into the later parts of the presentation. But empathy and morality are things that our kids are struggling with, especially in these early years. I say all that because when you have these moments as a parent, when your kid struggles with these things, understand there's a biological reason they're struggling with it. Be patient, be understanding, be calm, be a thermostat, not a thermometer. Hopefully you've heard that phrase before. Be a thermostat where you keep the temperature in the room at a certain temperature, not a thermometer where you respond to the temperature. Do those things, but keep in mind, if you're going to hand a kid access to the internet and access to, by the way, people online, understand you're giving a kid who's struggling with these things access to a lot of dangerous content. All right. The question that I want to address now, so we understand that the prefrontal cortex is developing. The question I want to answer now is what happens when we introduce technology to these developing brains. You'll notice this adorable child with a cup on his head. That's my youngest, having a great time at pre-K. I'm going to give you some numbers that are intended to help you and support you and not scare you to death, although it may do a little bit of both. Here's digital stimulation. So in the preschool age years, I'm going to give you some hard numbers for how technology impacts preschool age brains. Okay? Digital stimulation is anything in front of a screen. So phone, iPad, Xbox, PlayStation, TV. That one kind of hurts. That's digital stimulation. Here we go. For every hour per day on average that a preschool age kid is engaged in digital stimulation, it is correlated to a 10% increase in the likelihood of a diagnosable attention disorder in early elementary school. I'm going to say that again. For every hour, on average, per day, that a preschool age kid engages in digital stimulation, it is correlated to a 10% increase in the likelihood of that kid being diagnosed with some form of an attention disorder in early elementary school. If you are like me, the first time you encountered that stat, you were calculating it up, and you're going, okay, 220%. Don't panic. There is good news at the end of this, I promise. But I want you to see this. If we put a screen in front of a preschool age kid, we can predict that that kid is going to have an increased likelihood of attention disorder in early elementary school. I'm going to speak from my experience, not from the experience of your district. I know I've got some district people here. The incidence of early elementary ADHD in my clinical experience have skyrocketed in the last 8 to 10 years, but really the last 5 or 6. We're going to talk about why that is, but I wanted you to see this. Now here's the good news. Okay, the good news is there's a way that we can mitigate this. There's a defense for this. Here's the defense. Let's talk about cognitive stimulation. Okay, cognitive stimulation. What is cognitive stimulation? Puzzles, singing a song, going outside and playing. Remember that? Remember going outside and playing? Why is that a memory that we all have, but it's not something that our kids can think of as readily as we could? Cognitive stimulation is literally your child engaging in any activity that doesn't involve a screen. Okay, so anything fun, recreational, educational, cognitive stimulation. For every hour on average per day that a child engages in cognitive stimulation, we reduce that same risk, that ADHD risk, we reduce it by 30%. Okay, so taken together, what can we get from these two numbers? What we can get is, when we put a screen in front of our kids, it raises the likelihood of attention issues. But if we can be really deliberate about putting in front of them cognitive activities, if we can be really deliberate in putting together hands-on activities for them, we can really mitigate a lot of the risk that comes from digital stimulation in early childhood. I say that because you remember a little while ago I told you I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. They have, in fact, my 6-year-old was not happy with me this morning because I'm using his iPad to do the presentation today. My kids have devices. It's okay. The goal here is not to prevent your child from ever seeing a screen. The average age for kids to begin regularly, daily, engaging with screen time. They want to take a stab at what age it is now? How old a child is when they begin every day engaging in screen time?
3,
3, 2, 1. You're all close. 4 months. The average age is 4 months. 4 months! Little Einsteins, that's what did it. I blame little Einsteins. 4 months. 4 months. At 4 months, we begin putting kids in front of screens. We begin putting the little iPad where they can see it because the colors and the shapes, they're drawn to it, and we can cook, and we can clean, and we can do all the things that we do as parents. So 4 months. All right, here's why I bring this up. I bring this up because there was a day and age, and in fact, most of us were raised in this day and age, where we didn't have to be real intentional about cognitive stimulation because cognitive stimulation was called being at home. It's just what you did. There wasn't a whole lot else to do. So for most of us as kids, we did cognitive stuff because that was our only option. Your kids have other options. They can do cognitive stuff. They can go outside and play. They can go to their room and play. They can play with toys. But as parents, it is imperative that we make a conscious decision, a conscious effort every day to ensure that our kids have some form of cognitive stimulation. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, okay, that's that high bar we were talking about. I'm not going to be able to put together some kind of like glue stick and popsicle stick activity every day. You don't have to be super creative. Cognitive stimulation can be as simple as telling your kids, I want you to go to the playroom, you're going to stay in there for 30 minutes and have a good time. You can only play with the toys that are in there, but as long as there's no screens, no technology, cognitive stimulation. That makes sense? Kids in that environment, their creativity grows, their empathy grows. It makes them actually smarter. I won't go into the details as to how that happens, but kids engaging with blocks and toys, and especially if they have siblings, learning that kind of negotiation, it makes them actually smarter. As parents, I'm asking you to do something that parents in previous generations didn't have to be asked to do. I'm asking you to be really intentional about ensuring that your kids have hands-on time to do things that don't require them to just sit and look at a screen. Make sense? All right, but the looking at the screen part, not the end of the world. Here's the question that everybody has when we talk about this. So, 10% increase in likelihood of ADHD, attention disorders. Why? How does this happen? What's the process? There's actually a really weirdly simple process to this. I'll read you the clinical version. Inattention in early education is positively correlated to the expectation of high levels of stimulation and rapid pacing created by digital input. So here's what that means. What that means is we have a bunch of kindergartners who are in school today who are struggling with a lot of the symptoms that look like ADHD. When in reality, what's happening inside these kids' brains are they want to swipe off their kindergarten teacher and they can't. And they want to swipe off a coloring page and they can't. They can't swipe off things. Imagine what kind of thought process you would have had as an early elementary student if you had been taught from the earliest times in your life that you were in control of your content, that you could manipulate things that you didn't like, you could change things you didn't like. I remember vividly. Remember Saturday morning cartoons, which by the way don't seem to exist anymore? Do you remember Saturday morning cartoons? I'm going to sound like an old man for just a minute. Do you remember Saturday morning cartoons? There was one rule if you wanted to watch Saturday morning cartoons. There was one requirement. What was the one requirement? You had to physically be sitting in front of the TV at a certain time when the show came on. Do you remember the greatest debate on Saturday morning that you would have? It was all internal. Sometimes it was external. I got one commercial break. I got to go to the bathroom and I got to get a snack. Which one? You got to pick one. You can only do one. You can't do both because the show wasn't going to wait for you. The commercial break wasn't going to wait for you. The idea that you could leave the house and come back and finish the show you were watching would have seemed like science fiction to us as kids. I say that mixtapes. I only got one other guy. You remember making a mixtape when you were? Yeah. Okay. So you remember like real mixtapes though, where you sat with the radio and you had the record button with a tape player, and you wait for that one song that you know she likes, and you wait, and then after it was over, you hit record again, and you talk, so she could hear you, baby. Stayed up till 2 in the morning to get that Mike and the Mechanic song I know you wanted. I got grounded. My mom came in 3 times. I won't see you for 3 weeks, but here's your mixtape. You remember that? Okay. Every one of those little lessons, they were valuable for us. Having to sit in front of a TV when the TV said a show was on, it was valuable for us. Having to find music, having to go to Tower Records and buy a CD. Those things are valuable for us. You know what each one of those little lessons taught us? You weren't in control. You were going to have to bend to the world to a degree. And you were going to have to work for stuff. When it comes to entertainment, our preschool age kids are living in a world where they are in total control of their content. If they don't like a show, what do? Swipe off of it. And they go to the next one. My 6-year-old does not understand the concept of live television. And I know that. You ever tried to watch a live show with a kid that age? It's a nightmare. I'll tell you why it's a nightmare. Because I flip it to a show that I know he likes, and then a commercial comes on, and he goes, skip it. I can't. Well, why not? Because I have to explain the whole history of broadcasting. Well, there's a studio, and they're sending I can't explain the concept of live television to my kid, because in his mind, you should be able to fast forward through commercials, and if you want to watch something else, just find it, right? All right, I say that because a generation of children are being raised with access to YouTube Kids. They're being raised with access to games and apps and activities that they have total control over. And as soon as they start to check out, or as soon as it gets boring, what do? Well, let's find another one. All right, so again, us as parents, we're kind of facilitating, to a degree, this consumer mentality in elementary age kids, and then we send them to school. And we have a kindergarten teacher who has worked for 2 weeks on an activity that she's super pumped about. And she introduces the activity to a classroom full of kindergarten age kids, and we've got 2 or 3 of them in there that don't really connect to the activity, don't really connect with whatever the content is, and they have this thought of wanting, because they're used to this, wanting to move on to the next thing, wanting to hear from the next speaker, wanting to get the next activity, the next assignment, and that's not the way that our education system works, and that's not the way our classrooms work, because it's an impossible task to ask a kindergarten teacher to create a completely self-contained, completely controllable set of resources and content for kindergarten age kids. So they get frustrated, they get antsy, they do all the ADHD looking stuff. In my world, before when I was back in the school district, they would pull dry erase boards off of walls, they would throw trash cans. They were angry, they were frustrated. And a large part of that was they were frustrated because they're used to being in control and they're not. Okay, so here's the problem. The problem with all this is technology is amazing. It's awesome. It's something that has made the world a much more connected place. It's made our lives much easier. It's made it weirdly more complicated. The more technology we get, the more access we have to each other, the more stressed out we seem to be, the higher our anxiety gets, but it doesn't change the fact that the technology that we're talking about is amazing and has given us the ability to do some amazing stuff. All right, we've talked a lot so far about these two. Okay, we've talked a lot about how technology impacts these two. I want to start moving towards the other end of the spectrum. I want to talk a little bit about how technology impacts those developing brains, those developed brains. I want to talk a little bit about these adolescent kids. I want to talk a little bit about adults, and we're actually even going to talk a little bit about the ones on the far end of the spectrum. For us to do that, there's one other thing. So I talked a little bit about biology a minute ago. I'm going to do it again for just a minute. So stay with me. I need you to understand what this thing does. This is dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter. The reason we're talking about dopamine is not because we're going to take a hard left into biology. We're talking about dopamine because if you understand how this chemical works, if you understand how this neurotransmitter works in your brain, you will understand why our method of technology consumption is concerning. Okay, so I need you to understand how dopamine works. If you are raising adolescent kids, you absolutely need to know how dopamine works. Yes, as it applies to technology, but if you understand how dopamine works, you understand why adolescent boys do stupid things. Okay, that's as simply as I can put it. Let's talk a little bit about dopamine. It helps regulate emotional responses, but the big thing is, and you can read some of the scientific stuff behind me, but here's the simplest way. This is the most elementary school way I can explain dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that predicts rewards. It makes you see something and want it. It reminds you that you like something. Every addictive disorder on the planet induces dopamine in some way, shape, or form. Dopamine is the thing that makes you know you like something, and then is the thing that makes you move towards that thing that you like. Okay? So something good happens to you, dopamine. Somebody you haven't seen in a long time, you have a warm, fuzzy feeling. That warm, fuzzy feeling is a dopamine release. High school kids who do dangerous stuff. High school kids who do risky things. Dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. During adolescence, and this is an important thing for you to understand about how dopamine works in the adolescent brain. We all have pathways for dopamine in our brain. In adolescence, those pathways are wider. Okay, so if you can imagine in an adolescent brain, it's a river. The pathway is a river for dopamine. In our brains, it's more like a creek. Okay, so it's a smaller pathway. In the adolescent brain, it's wider. Now, here's why that's important. That's important because it allows adolescent kids to feel feelings that are more intense than the feelings that we feel. That's one of the reasons why if you've got a 16-year-old kid, you got a 16-year-old girl who's crying and I love him so much. And she's crying because she's devastated at this relationship that meant the world. It's all she's ever wanted for 3.5 weeks. And she has this commitment and this emotional reaction to this relationship falling apart. I get it. We look at the stats and we say, well, it's been 3 weeks. You have no idea what love is. We say all this adult type stuff when in reality, the feeling she's feeling is very intense and it's very real. That feeling is not manufactured. That feeling has something to do with those widened pathways. It's the reason that that boys engage in, again, dangerous activities on a regular basis. It's because that dopamine pathway is wider. Now, historically speaking, there's something else about that wide pathway that's really important. If a high school kid is not engaged in some sort of novel activity where that dopamine is being released, their dopamine pathways dry up because, again, they're wider than ours, which is why if your kid is sitting on a couch at 15, they're going to say, I'm bored. And you're going to get mad because I spent how much money on that Xbox and on that over here and this toy over here, and you can talk to me. You can always talk to me. Why won't you just talk to me? But I'm bored. All right, I I say that because that feeling of boredom, that feeling of this environment is not stimulating for me. You know what that's always done for generations, what that's done to teenagers? It's sent them out of your house. It sent them out into the real world. It sent them to college. It sent them into the workforce. It sent them into places because home, really and truly, chemically and biologically, didn't really do it for them. All right, we did something though. We did something not that long ago that took a generation of especially young men hostage. What did we bring into the house that took a generation of young men hostage? We brought video games into the house. Now, let's talk about dopamine and video games. There is nothing. What I just said about dopamine, we're seeking a dopamine rush. There's nothing more impactful in an adolescent life than a dopamine rush. That's what they're looking for. And by the way, if you want to work that to your advantage, if you can find novel activities to experience with a high school age kid, odds are they'll remember that. You'll remember that. It'll be a meaningful moment and a bonding experience. This chemical reaction right now to give me the most meaningful relationships you had prior to meeting your spouse or your current partner, most of you would tell me somebody from when you were 17. That's not an accident. It's because chemically speaking, we have a bond that takes place when we have those experiences at 16, 17, 18 years old. We're seeking dopamine. And when we find it, we go back to the well. There is nothing in the analog world. So in our world right here, there's nothing in the analog world that can release dopamine at a higher rate and at faster intervals than video games. Nothing. So for a 17-year-old boy, there's nothing in the real world that can give him a dopamine fix like sitting in front of his Xbox or sitting in front of his PlayStation. I say that because if you look at the behavior of especially young men. Now, I'm being hard on young men, but we'll get to why it's not young women here in just a minute. I'm being hard on young men. If you look at the behavior of young men and their video games, it mirrors every clinical addictive behavior we have. We just don't often label it that way because we look at it and say, well, just stop playing. There's a chemical bond that's going on with the experience, not necessarily with the chemical that's being introduced. It's with a chemical that's a reaction to the experience they're having. I put some kids at the bottom with their cell phones because digital gaming in any way, shape, or form does the same thing. Candy Crush, dopamine. Farmville, remember when that was huge? When that was a big thing? Dopamine. It's all dopamine. These are all dopamine dispensers. All of them are dopamine dispensers. I say that because I want you to understand that girls are outpacing boys in every academic category. They're going to college at a higher rate, graduating from college at a higher rate, they're entering the workforce at a higher rate. They are doing everything between the ages of like 15, 14, 13, and 30. Girls are outpacing boys in every major category. There's a theory, a predominant theory in my field, that video games are a large reason for that. Because video games have, again, taken a generation of boys hostage and has not done that with girls. Now, a question I get a lot is, why boys? Why is there something chemically different with boys and girls? The answer to that is oddly, no. The reason why it's boys and not girls is because in the 80s and 90s, when personal console gaming was being developed, gaming companies figured out that boys are just a lot easier to market to. They like a specific type of game. And so they started making that game, and then video games became this almost gender-specific thing. But girls are certainly not immune to this. All the little dings on their phone, all the little things they do on their phone, dopamine, text messages, dopamine. I want to show you, if you understand this next slide, then you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. Anybody's kids play these games? The Lego games? This is Lego Marvel Avengers. All right, my kids are obsessed with these games, which is a weird word given what I just said. My kids love these games. If you understand how these games work, then you understand how dopamine creates addiction. Okay, so here's how the Lego games work. When you open up the game, there are two characters that you can be, but there's a screen with like 150 that are locked. I can unlock those. That's exciting. They're making people up. Pixel guy, he's on there somewhere. You know what I mean? But the fact that he's locked means we want him. When the game starts, the levels, you only do one level at a time, and then gradually it opens up into this bigger world that they can explore. But it happens little bits at a time, and on each level, you can collect little studs, and those little small tiny rewards add up to medium-sized rewards. And then those medium rewards, then you can buy bigger rewards and bigger stud multipliers. And by the time you unlock everything that exists in this game, you have been playing non-stop for like 3 months. Okay, that's how this behavior works. And if you understand that about the Lego games, then you'll understand that about how all of these other games work. Now, for the record, I told you I'm not going to make you feel bad. I'm really not. My kids play these games. I played them with them. They are a lot of fun. The goal here is regulation. We played them in small increments. It took 6, 8, 9 months to get through them. And the open world setting, if you understand open world gaming, has a different effect than just the levels. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. All right, so dopamine and kids' brains. That's how dopamine works. I want to show you a list of some other dopamine dispensers. Now we get into some of the tech stuff, right? If you're a parent, you've seen at least some of these. What's that one?
That's make a call?
Very close. That is WhatsApp.
Oh.
WhatsApp is owned by Facebook. It's a messaging app. A messaging app is owned by Facebook. This one has been more problematic on middle school campuses than any other app. It's not nearly as popular now as it used to be, and the primary reason for that is because old people like me know about it, and we talk to parents about it, and so parents are much more in tune with what's going on Kick. But these are some of the apps that work as dopamine dispensers inside your kids' minds. Let's talk a little bit about how. Kick was problematic for a lot of different reasons. It was a group messaging app that allowed you to enter into group messages and then just trade messages. Now, why that was such a problem is 2 reasons. One, you could edit your username by just editing your username. It wasn't tied to anything. So if you wanted to change your name and be a totally different person, you could do that, which was dangerous for kids. And then there's a grouping behavior that took place on Kick as well, where kids would create groups and they kick somebody out of the group, and it was a whole big thing. But Kick works just like a group message on your phone, a group text on your phone. The reason that's a dopamine dispenser is because what we find with kids is that the behavior, when they're engaging in group messaging apps, the behavior mirrors a lot of those video game scenarios that we talked about, where the dopamine release is hard to ignore. And each response, each like, each thumbs up, each man that's really funny, each picture, they all release a chemical that creates an addictive mentality in our kids. And then, by the way, these are kids that are very susceptible to this. Kids with widened dopamine pathways are always going to be more susceptible to addiction. It's why when kids want to argue about the addictive nature of marijuana in high school, which is something that a lot of kids want to argue against, they're ignoring that fact. With the dopamine pathway in an adolescent brain being wider, they're more susceptible to addiction of any kind. Make sense? All right, I say that because all of these little apps, Snapchat, every snap that comes through, they're all triggering that same response, that same reaction. It is the reason. You ever take a high school kid's phone away for 2 days and actually watch their behavior, watch what happens? It's depression, right? I won't go into the full story, but there was a research study that was done in New York not that long ago with high school age kids, and they were going to just watch what happened over the span of 3 days without access to their phone. They could go places. They were in an apartment, but they could go on the street. They could talk to people. They had, I want to say it was 75 participants. Less than 5 of them actually made it through the 3 days, and they had to eventually stop the study because of suicidal ideation. 3 days without a phone. All right, that is a chemical issue. That is not just an issue of kids really liking their devices. 2 other things I want to mention. You know this one? Okay, if you're a high school or middle school parent, you may want to be aware of that one. That one's called After School. After School is an app it's a public message board app. Okay, so what I mean by that is you can go on it from anywhere and post a message that goes to everybody in your little group. Okay, but they're grouped not by individual groups. They don't create their own groups. They're grouped by campus. So it literally has, every high school has its own after school page. And after school goes to great lengths to ensure that parents can't get in. So, yeah, if you read the description of them, they pride themselves on it being a safe place for high school age kids to talk and explore ideas and identities without the adults being around. I don't know why you're so concerned about that. Yeah, after school, by the way, after school had some problems, shockingly. And as a result, they shut down, well, not shut down, they retooled their moderation. They have more moderation now than they've ever had, but I still wouldn't recommend it. Two other things I want to mention before we move on. Tinder. If you've got a middle school, high school age kid, you probably have encountered this, and my guess is they will tell you that it's for fun, they do it with their friends, they just kind of look through it. Tinder is a dangerous app for kids for a lot of reasons. There's some safety issues. There's a video on my website that I interviewed a couple of people who'd had experiences with social media, high school kids who'd had really problematic experiences on social media. There's one of them where Tinder plays a key role. I encourage you to watch that with your high school age kid. But the reason I mention Tinder is because I want you to know that Tinder does something a little different. If you don't know what it is, or if you want to pretend that you don't know what it is, that's fine. We'll play along. Tinder is an app where you scroll through pictures of available people in your area, and you decide who's attractive and who's not. It's, swipe right if you think they're attractive, swipe left if you don't, and if they swipe right on you and you swipe right on them, it gives you an opportunity to match. You have a chance to talk to each other. That's problematic on a lot of levels, but the dopamine reaction and the chemical reaction to Tinder is really interesting because, one, what we find is that, like any other addiction, people who use this app a lot are less and less happy and content with what they're experiencing on it. And second, people who use Tinder as a dating resource, in the academic literature and the counseling world, seem to be less happy with the relationships that they're in. And one of the possible explanations for that is because Tinder allows kids and adults, for the record, to feel like there's always something better. All right, last thing I want to point out. You'll notice the one on the bottom right, that's not an app. That's just an emoji. The reason this guy's here is because there's something else, and this might help you understand your Nana a little bit more. Anger, especially anger directed at stuff we see online, dopamine. We're getting addicted to being angry online, and it releases the exact same chemical. Anger releases the same chemical as some of the other things that we've talked. It's not just pleasure that releases dopamine, it's intensity. So you being super mad about that post, that's dopamine. And that's one of the reasons why Nana just can't shut it down. Because she goes into Facebook and sees something she doesn't like and she gets worked up about it, and it brings her back. So engaging with people in digital warfare, so you're arguing with each other online, dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. All right, I want to conclude that section with this statement. Most of us worry about one question. The one question we worry about is what are they doing with the technology? As long as they're not doing anything bad, we figure, it's probably fine. The question I want us to be thinking about today is what's the technology doing to them? So not an issue of what they're doing with technology, but what's the technology doing to them? I'm going to put just a couple of things. When kids engage with social media, and by the way, the kids here applies to kids as young as 10. Here is what we find. Increased feelings of comparison and jealousy in participants as young as 10 years old. In my study that I recently did on Facebook and marriage, 80% of the women in that study admitted in private to comparing their life to what they see on Facebook. They admitted fully they knew it was curated, they knew it was fake, they knew it wasn't real, but it still made them feel less capable as mothers, it still made them feel less capable as women, it still made them feel less capable as individuals. And what we find is that same reality is true in kids as young as 10 years old. They see things online that they don't have, and they want them. Increased feelings of envy and conflict. Participants, and this is the one that bothered me, participants, both adults and kids, who have social media accounts that they check every day, are 40% less likely to rely on face-to-face interaction when they have a hard time. So when kids struggle, or when adults struggle, if they've got social media they can go to, they'd rather do that than go to you. Social media is negatively correlated to the connection within the family from the perspective of the kid. As a family counselor, one of the biggest complaints I get from teenage kids is mom won't put her phone down. Next up, lower life satisfaction, heightened envy. You kind of get the point here. The point is all of those social media problems that I think we thought were exclusive to adults are not. They are true in children as well. Some other things really quickly. Researchers find that adolescents who engage in daily digital technology display issues such as an inability to control urges to look at their phone. The devices are used as an escape or an avoidance for undesirable feelings, and the phone created problems such as they wanted to quit and they couldn't. I put these up here because I want you to know this is the definition of an addiction. This is the definition of a chemical, physical, psychological addiction. and it applies to the technology world, but we're just starting to catch up with that fact. But it's not just the biological impact, it's the social impact as well. Social media for our kids is redefining their lives, and it's redefining social norms. There was a survey that I read with 3,000 young people who had a relationship end, they'd had a breakup within the previous year. 56% of them said that they had either done the breaking up or been broken up with via text or social media, which is crazy, right? So that's almost 60% of them got broken up with through a text message or through a message. What was crazy is that 80% of those said they preferred it that way. They would rather just get the text than to have a face-to-face conversation. When I say social media is rearranging and redefining social norms, if you've ever seen, and I know if you've worked on a high school campus or if you've been on a high school campus, you'll know this. If you've ever seen the way kids talk to each other online, they use words and phrases like "go kill yourself." They talk really explicitly about violence and about things that horrify us as parents. And we wonder sometimes what's gone wrong with this generation, when in reality, nothing. They're doing exactly what we would expect them to do. Who gets attention on social media? Who do we pay attention to? Who gets followers? Does anybody get followers because they're super reasonable, super rational, and they think everything through, and they think about the consequences of their actions? No. Who gets followers on social media? The craziest, loudest, most extreme people that exist on the platform. How long do we expect kids to get that message and to not start acting it out in their day-to-day lives? That makes sense? To get the idea, the message that how I get attention is to be outrageous and to be crazy and to say crazy things. We give them that message, and again, but then we blame the kids for it when they've been getting that message from a rational place. So the bottom line is, man, this is a kid problem. It's all about those kids. The kids are the issue, and if we can just get a hold of those kids, we'll be fine, right? So this is a picture I took in my son's pediatrician's office. I know I probably shouldn't do that, and I hate that we're broadcasting this live, because if you're watching, it's your fault. You should have been taking it on your phone. So here's what happened. I was in the pediatrician's office with my 3-year-old, and there were screaming children everywhere. It was Lord of the Flies in that place. And I looked around, and every person in the room was staring at a phone. Now, if you're one of my AP students and you're thinking, well, how did you take the picture? I got my phone out to take the picture, then it went right back in my pocket, and I went back to judging people the way God intended. So I say that because if we're going to talk about our kids' technology, we need to talk about our technology for just a minute. Remember that whole dopamine I was talking about a little while ago? Same thing applies to you. In our day-to-day lives, a dopamine spike, if we're on like a 1 to 10 scale, a dopamine spike of like a 7 is awesome and amazing. But Facebook, if you just keep scrolling, it kind of sits you right around the 6. You're just kind of humming along at that 6. Your life, your real life can't compete with the dopamine rush that can be induced by your cell phone. I'm going to say this, and you can disagree with me, but I've sat with enough parents to know that this is true, and I've seen enough research. Your kids can't compete with the dopamine rush from your phone. And if in a vacuum where you're not making moral judgments, you're more entertained looking at your phone than you are looking at your kids. And that's a horrifying reality. So I say that because we need to be willing and able to set our own phones down as often as possible. I've encountered many parents who struggle with this. In a very biologically real way, our cell phones are making us less happy with anything that's not our cell phone. Our cell phone is conditioning us to be a certain level of engaged. And our cell phones are conditioning us to be a certain level of involved and connected. And the real world can't keep up. And so we look around and think, well, I don't have it all here. And this is not a conscious choice, by the way. It's not a conscious choice to say, I'd rather be on my phone than with my kids. It's something that happens internally. I won't go into it for the sake of time. I'm going to roll through this pretty quickly. There's a lot of evidence that points to cell phones detracting from the relationship of two people and detracting from their intimacy, even if the phones aren't being used. This particular study that I was referencing, there were two people talking. They measured their levels of intimacy after the phone call or after the conversation, and what they found was that those levels went way down when a phone was present. If the phone wasn't on and wasn't being used, it still reduced their levels of intimacy. Unintentionally, I think we've created phone-obsessed homes, and then we blame our kids for being phone-obsessed. That makes sense? We complain about Xboxes, we complain about the time they spend online, and yet it's the first thing we do when we have a chance to sit down. It's the first thing we do when we have a chance to take a break. We pull our phone out and we get mad that our kid wants to do the exact same thing on an Xbox. Right? I say that because, look, it's hard to ask for unhealthy kids, or hard to ask for healthy kids in an unhealthy home. We're the most distracted culture in history, and I think to a large degree, that's the result of the technology that we've introduced into this culture. But the important thing to me is kids, it's not kids. There's nothing wrong with kids today. If you've sat in your car and talked to people, if you've sat in your living room and talked to other family members, nothing wrong with kids. They're doing exactly what I would expect. Before we get into the solutions to some of these things, I want to talk a little bit about schools. I have technology people in school districts who get very nervous by the first 40 minutes of this presentation because I think the end of it is going to be me saying, so we need to again go tech free, and we need to go back to building things out of wood and arts and crafts. And yeah, that stuff's awesome, but I want you to know that school technology and educational technology that's being introduced on campuses is different than what we just described. Schools are desperately trying to meet kids where they are. There's an expectation that they will engage with technology. My kid I have an older one who goes to school. He's in first grade. I have an expectation that he will engage in technology in his classroom. Why? He's growing up in a digital world. He's got to know how to navigate it. His job is probably going to depend on whether or not he understands some basics about technology. So I do not want you to hear that educational technology is the enemy. It is absolutely not. And in fact, the way you can get the most out of educational technology and the technology that your schools are implementing is you can be a part of it. You can not only encourage your kids to do it, but you sit with your kids. When the technology works as a substitute for you, that's a problem. But when you work to support the technology, your kids are going to benefit, you're going to benefit, and at that point, the purposes and the goals of the school district are really going to be are going to come to fruition. For the record, I didn't have any of these conversations with any of the district people from Carrollton-Farmers branch. I'm not giving a message that is, well, make sure we talk about how good I'm telling you this as a professional. Educational technology is a valuable part of their education, and I don't want you to walk out of here thinking that, okay, we're getting rid of all the devices, and if they can't do homework, then they can't do homework, we're going to ask for a separate assignment. That's not the best policy. It's the policy of every school district in America that teachers use best practices and that they vet their programs. No system is perfect, no app is perfect, no assignment is perfect, but you can bet if it comes from their school, it has probably been vetted, and I would strongly encourage you to be a part of that process. All right, having said that, let's get to the solutions page. I want to talk for a second about what we do with all of this information, and the solutions are actually probably a little more simple than you'd expect. Step one, I want you to talk. We don't talk about this. I don't know why necessarily, but my study was on Facebook in relationships and Facebook in marriages. It's really personal when we talk about cell phone use. If your partner comes to you and says, hey, I kind of feel like you've been on your phone a lot, we take that personally. It is a personal assault, and I want to remove the stigma from that. We need to be able to talk openly with purpose, with clarity, and I want to give you some tools that might help you do that. On that website that I sent you to earlier, yourbestfamily.com, there's a menu. It's called a family technology plan. There's a video that explains it, so I won't go through the entire thing now, but what I want you to know is this technology plan looks like this, and it gives you as a parent a blueprint for how to have this conversation with your kids and how to have it with your partner. You go through each section. You say, all right, what are some rules and norms that we want to establish for our family all the time? So we want to say together that nobody has any devices during meals. Okay, let's do that. We want to say that all the devices have to charge in the master bedroom at night because no kid should ever have a device in their room overnight. No kid should ever have a device in their room overnight. No kid should ever have a device in their room overnight. And also, they should not have a device in their room overnight. If you're thinking like, well, yeah, but mine are 16. Yeah, especially at 16. At 16, they can't ignore the dings and the messages and the notifications. And for boys, there's other things they can't ignore. I cannot stress this enough. I've said it now like 6 times. Kids should not have devices in their room overnight at any age. We have some rules and restrictions. Well, now we move to here. Kids, we got some sections on kids. All right, I don't want you to lock your screens when you're at home. Do the password and unlock it. I want, this one may seem ridiculous. It says no secret social media accounts. All right, that should be a no-brainer, right? I still want you to say it. I say that because I don't want your kids to do drugs, but I don't want them to just know that that's kind of what they're supposed to do. I want you to say it out loud. I want you to sit in front of your kid and say, hey, do not create any fake social media accounts that don't really represent you. Okay, I need that message to come from you because then if they do it, two things are happening. One, they've heard your message, and two, that's direct defiance, and that's a little different than, well, I didn't know that was a problem, and we never read. All right, so that's something that's important. Another one, don't be mean to people online. I want you to say it. Don't be mean. Don't ever use your social media accounts to be mean to people. Don't say negative things about your family online. That's really important, and this hopefully this guide will let you walk through that conversation. But be prepared for what happens next. Here's the parent section. The parent section is where your kids get to tell you, okay, here's what I would like. I would like for you to show me a picture before you post it to Facebook. Because you may have thought that picture of me with a trash can on my head was cute. I was embarrassed by that. Okay, so that'll give your kids an opportunity to say, here's what we don't like. All right, some other things, social media, video games. This section, slip-ups, you can agree in advance. If we have a problem, you notice there's numbers by all these policies. We agree in advance. If we violate policy number 3, we already know what the consequence is. We've already had this conversation. We don't have to go through this big, well, we're going to think about it, and then we'll talk, and we'll decide, and then as soon as the kid leaves, you go, I don't know how to do this. We don't have to do that. We've already had this conversation. I also want you to be learning constantly. The tech world's moving fast. If you're not already going to a website to get information about what technology is out there, here's a good one. I really like it. Most elementary campuses use this at some point. Common Sense Media gives parent guides to every app, every video game, really every movie and show. My kids want to download apps from time to time, and the first thing I do if I don't know what it is I go to Common Sense Media and I look for a review. So educate yourself that way. Next, I'm going to say something that I know is very difficult for parents to hear. You don't like this message. We have got to, as parents, we've got to teach resilience to our children, and we've got to teach proactive safety. Now, here's what I mean. I mean that sometimes when someone says something horrible to a 15-year-old girl on social media, sometimes the message for us as parents, when that's our daughter, we want to attack. We want to find out who it is. We want to find out where they are. We want to know if there's legal stuff that we can do. We want the school to handle it. Something needs to happen. There needs to be punishment. Sometimes the conversation with our kid needs to be, sweetie, maybe you need to get off Twitter. Maybe we need to shut this down. Maybe we need to close the app. Maybe we need to use the mute button. And I say that not because I want your kids to learn to not defend themselves. Don't misunderstand me. But I know this because I worked in educational technology for a long time. Sometimes there's not a punitive solution. Sometimes school districts' hands are tied. Law enforcement's hands are tied. Sometimes there's not a, well, here's the punishment for that horrible thing you said to my kid. Sometimes the solution is, maybe we step out of the arena where these things are taking place. We teach our kids resilience. We talk to them about the opinions of people who matter. We talk to them about our sphere. We draw a little circle, and we put the most important people in your life inside that circle, and we talk about how these people, their opinions matter about us. We work for those opinions. We work to ensure that the people inside this circle have the highest opinions of us. Now let's keep moving outside and get bigger and bigger and bigger circles. This person who said this thing to you, what circle are they in? And they're way out here. Okay, so then let's talk about impact. If somebody out here says something as opposed to somebody in here. Does that make sense? We do those things by talking about resilience and proactive safety. And I know we're up against the clock, so I'm going to roll through these last two pretty quickly. We want to teach awareness. And there's a website I'm going to send you to through my website. SamandScott.com is a blog, and I found this activity there, and it is a fantastic activity. It's called a social media inventory for high school students. I have done this presentation in churches, and when I do it in churches, I have the youth group do this activity while I'm working with the parents. What this activity is they have to go through their last 100 social media posts and categorize them. So they have to put them into, and I'll show you what these categories look like. It's hard to see, but showing off, lyrics, teenage angst, positive, happy stuff, wouldn't want my parents to see it. I don't need to know what you posted, but I need you to put it in a specific category. All right, at the end of this, you've categorized 100 social media posts. The question that I want you to ask this kid who's just done this activity is, okay, if I don't know you, who do I think you are based on this? Because that's what we're showing the world. We're showing the world through our social media accounts oftentimes who we are. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but any of you ever had an experience where someone you didn't talk to on a regular basis, your opinion of them began to lower because of the things they posted? Because of the things they put online, and you started thinking, and your actual value judgments of them went down. I may or may not be talking about people in my own life, but let's keep moving. I want you to recognize how hard this is. I want you to plan for that. You need each other for accountability. The last little tool I'll give you, and I know I'm a bit over, so we'll roll really quickly. The last tool I'll give you is something called the kitchen safe. You can find it on Amazon. I don't get paid by the kitchen safe. I love this device because it's a big Tupperware thing that you put stuff in it, and then you set the timer, and it vacuum locks. And when there's no key or like rain dance, or there's nothing you can do to get that thing open. The timer just has to run out. So when phones go in it, and when controllers for Xboxes go in it, and when iPads go in it, yeah, it's super effective because it does two things. One, it prevents your kids from getting to the thing, and two, it prevents you from backing down when they mope. I just want my phone. And so then you start negotiating with them. All right, if you can be a normal human for like an hour, to be a normal human, don't make me angry, don't complain, don't whine, don't cry, then maybe we'll have it. The kitchen safe is a better parent. Because a kitchen safe says, no, we said 3 hours, we're sticking to it, 3 hours. So I encourage you to look at the kitchen safe because it is one of those things that can help you be a better parent. Just a quick heads up, I presented this like 3 years ago at another school district. I went back the next year for another presentation, and I had a parent say, hey, love that kitchen safe. Just a heads up, car keys fit in it really well, and if your kids are mad at you, that can happen. Yeah. I asked her how long did they set it for. She said a week. I said, oh, awesome. She had to break the kitchen safe to get in. It does break. It's not made of steel. All right. I'm going to finish here. Technology it's the candy of our generation. I got no issue with it. And by the way, everybody makes different choices. Some of you don't want your kids anywhere near candy, and I respect that. That's awesome. I appreciate you not judging me for letting mine, and I'll try to do the same for you. I think technology is the same way. If you choose to not expose your kid to digital stuff, awesome. Good for you. I respect that choice. If another parent chooses, yeah, we're going to do it, but we're going to monitor, and we're going to be really involved, I'm okay with that too. My goal is, just like with candy, nothing unsupervised. I would not hand my kid a bucket of candy, shut the door, and say, have a good night, son. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't expect you would do the same. So I want you to be able to look at technology in the same way. I'm going to monitor it. I'm going to be really careful as to what they're consuming, and I'm not going to give them unfettered access to a candy dish. And you know what else I'm not going to do? I'm definitely not going to stick a vending machine in their pocket before they're ready. Does that make sense? If we can wrap our brains around technology in that respect, I think we're going to be much better off. The last thing I'll tell you is also, just like candy, your kids are probably going to mirror you in a lot of ways. So if you are on your phone every day when your kid comes home from school, I would not expect your kid to not want to do the exact same thing. If you set the expectation on the weekends that your phones are invisible, they can't be seen, they're stuck in a drawer somewhere because you're going to hang out with your family, that's a high bar, it's a high expectation, but your kids are going to be much more likely to follow that than they are if you look at them with your phone in your hand like this going, I want you off those screens, I want you off those screens. It's hard for kids to see that kind of a paradox and to wrap their brains around it. Make sense? So we get a hold of technology in our families. I think we can get a hold of technology in our homes. There's contact information. If you have questions, follow-up stuff that you'd like to know about, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I know we're over. If we need to cut the feed, obviously we can, but I want to open it to questions in case anybody is still lingering and has them. Anybody here have questions? And by the way, if you're at home, we have thousands of parents in attendance here, so I'm going to have to look around. And
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I wanted you to, how do you support technology as a parent? How do you support your, you mentioned about supporting them.
Yeah.
How do you go about that?
Walk alongside them. I've spent a lot of time. Lego games, I remember the first one we ever played. We played them together. They're two-player games, and if they're not two-player games, I will sit next to my 6-year-old while he's on his iPad. I'm not necessarily watching everything he's doing, but I want the sound on where I can hear it, and I want to be close enough to where I can see certain messages and certain things. I've caught more stuff that way than I ever would have researching. You know what I mean? So I say that because the mistake I think we make is we turn technology into the babysitter. Here's the device. I'm gonna do this with the iPad, and the reason I'm going to do that is because now I can go do my thing while you're engaged in this. That's okay. I've done that before too, by the way. I've done that before too, but when this goes on, and when my kids have headphones and an iPad, I know exactly what they're doing, because we've limited it to where they can watch this specific thing on Netflix. We put a movie on that we've seen. That's different. If they're just playing, sound on, and you're going to be sitting close enough for me to see it. Again, I'm not watching every second of what they're doing. I'm not peering over their shoulder, but I'm going to be sitting close enough to know if I hear something that's concerning. And again, that's happened. YouTube. That's how I learned, and I've heard about it. This phenomenon that I'm sure a bunch of you can relate to. That's how I learned that kids like to watch other kids playing games. I don't know that I understand that, and I don't know, there's got to be some kind of psychology behind it. But why they watch kids play games that they've got, but they would rather watch. It's a whole. So it's a jump in logic I can't get. But I learned that because my son started watching Ethan Tube Gamer. You guys know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Yeah, yes. And then started trying to talk with a British accent, and that's where I drew the line. Yeah. So, but that's how I do it. When I say monitor, I mean it. If we're doing this right as parents, look, our kids are always going to be able to do stuff that we don't know. And for the record, if the bar in your house, if the expectation is that you will be able to see everything your kid does, best of luck. There are always going to be mistakes. There's always going to be things that they do that we wish they hadn't done. But I think the way we reduce that is we just pay as careful attention as we possibly can. Other questions? Yeah?
We do have an online question.
Oh, great.
Is asking about what you think about cell phones in the middle school during the school day, and especially during the lunchroom when they have free time.
I appreciate the loaded question, and I appreciate, as the district, you guys put me out to answer that one. So here's, my answer to that question is, it's not the technology, it's us. I'm sure there are lots of middle school kids who can sit in a cafeteria and can, learn about animals, probably, right? I mean, maybe one or two of them is learning about things, or is doing their homework, or is doing something that's not dangerous. But yeah, there's a mob mentality that exists with everybody. I taught middle school. I did a 5-year stretch at middle school, and it was, I loved my kids that I worked with, but it was overwhelming because the mob mentality, middle school kids, and this is true of everybody, but middle school kids in particular, will do things collectively and together that they would not do individually. And I say that because we had to be very careful. I was a basketball and a football coach. We had to be very careful about what stuff was being passed around on phones in locker rooms, and it was concerning. So my opinion is, we talked about educational technology at the end. I understand why schools are doing it. I also understand why they're going to a bring your own device policy as opposed to one-to-one devices. I think there's a lot of logic in that. I think it makes good sense. In terms of using them on the middle school campus, again, the problem we run into is we've got really sound policy, but kids circumvent that really sound policy. So my advice to parents is, if you're on a middle school campus where your kids have phones as a part of their educational system, by the way, as a part of their educational day, that's fine. That's the same as every other middle school kid in the world. Your job as a parent is to have those conversations we talked about earlier about what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. I can't promise your kids aren't going to make bad choices online, but if you can have these conversations, what I can promise is they're going to know they're making bad choices, which completely changes the conversation that you have with them. Does that make sense? I can't prevent a kid from doing drugs. What I can do is talk to them about the dangers, talk to them about my expectation, talk to them about what I want and what I don't want, and then know that if they make that mistake anyway, we still have the platform for a very valuable conversation. We don't start from scratch. We don't wait until they've done something wrong to have that conversation. So that would be my answer to dodging that loaded question. Any other questions? Okay. With that said, I'm going to hang out for a few minutes, so if you've got one that's maybe a little more personal that you want broadcast out to the world, I would be more than happy to hang out for that. District-wise, you guys got anything? Anything we need to do or say? Bridget?